Every ride at an amusement park makes the same unspoken promise: you'll be scared, and then you'll walk away fine. 10 times in American history, that promise broke completely, and regulators had no choice but to shut the ride down for good. So today, we're counting down 10 deadliest attractions in America that got banned. Number 10. The Big Dipper. Let's start nearly a century back, because America's amusement industry learned some of its harshest lessons early. The Big Dipper was a wooden roller coaster at Krug Park in Omaha, Nebraska, a popular local attraction that drew regulars all summer long. On July 24, 1930, a single faulty bolt holding a brake shoe in place slipped loose while a car was barreling down the track. The dislodged bolt jammed the rear wheels, which triggered a chain reaction. The lead car derailed, smashed through a guardrail, and dragged 3 more cars down with it. Passengers were crushed in the pileup. 4 people died, and 17 more were critically injured, making it one of the deadliest coaster accidents in American history. The city's response was swift and blunt. Omaha banned roller coasters outright in the immediate aftermath, and Krug Park itself, unable to recover its reputation or its attendance, closed permanently within the decade. It's worth noting the ban didn't hold forever, since Omaha is home to a roller coaster today, but for a stretch of the early 1930s, an entire American city decided the risk simply wasn't worth it anymore. What makes the Big Dipper worth starting this list with is how familiar its failure sounds nearly a century later. A single small component, one bolt, failed under repeated stress, and nobody caught it before it mattered. That exact pattern, a tiny overlooked mechanical detail eventually cascading into catastrophe, shows up again and again throughout the rest of this list, whether it's a corroded support beam decades later or a sensor manually adjusted by a few extra inches. Amusement rides are enormously complex machines built to survive constant repeated stress cycles for years at a time, and the 1930 investigation into Krug Park's disaster helped establish one of the earliest precedents that a single point of mechanical failure, however small, was reason enough for a government to intervene. Number 9. Wild Wonder. Nearly 70 years later, almost the exact same failure happened again, just with modern engineering that should have prevented it. Wild Wonder was a roller coaster installed for the 1999 season at Jillian's Wonderland Pier, a boardwalk amusement park in Ocean City, New Jersey. On August 28, 1999, a car climbing the lift hill lost traction, and its anti-rollback device, the mechanical safety feature specifically designed to stop exactly this scenario from happening, failed. The car slid backward roughly 30 feet down the incline and slammed into another car still being loaded at the bottom. 39-year-old Kimberly Bailey and her 8-year-old daughter Jessica, visiting from Westchester, New York, were killed in the collision. 2 more riders in the car below were injured. State investigators later confirmed what witnesses already suspected. A defective lap bar combined with the failed anti-rollback mechanism turned a routine ascent into a fatal accident. The ride had passed a state inspection barely a month earlier. Wild Wonder never operated again, and the boardwalk landmark quietly dropped it from its lineup for good, a stark reminder that a fresh coat of paint and a recent inspection certificate don't automatically mean a ride is safe. The park's own general manager, Jay Gillian, addressed the tragedy at a press conference held on the boardwalk that same day, expressing condolences to the Bailey family and pointing out that the ride had cleared 2 separate state inspections just weeks earlier, one on July 1st and a follow-up on July 21st. Governor Christie Whitman herself had attended the ride's grand opening earlier that summer. That detail matters because it underscores exactly how little warning anyone had. This wasn't a ride with a known history of complaints or a manufacturer already facing scrutiny elsewhere. It was a brand new attraction, inspected twice by the state and celebrated by the governor's office, that failed catastrophically within its first season of operation. Number 8. Haunted Castle. Not every entry on this list is a mechanical failure. Some are almost entirely about what a park was willing to cut corners on to save money. On May 11, 1984, a fire broke out inside the Haunted Castle at Six Flags Great Adventure in Jackson, New Jersey, a walk-through spook house built out of 17 linked truck trailers dressed up with a medieval facade. The fire started when a young visitor reportedly used a cigarette lighter to see through a darkened corridor, igniting foam padding on the wall. Because the structure was legally classified as temporary, despite having operated at the park for years, it wasn't held to the same fire codes as a permanent building. There were no sprinklers, no smoke alarms, insufficient exits for the number of people packed inside the narrow, maze-like corridors. 8 teenagers died, all of them within just 25 feet of a fire exit they never reached in time. Six Flags Great Adventure and its parent company were indicted on charges of aggravated manslaughter, accused of ignoring specific safety warnings about the exact hazards that ended up killing 8 kids. After an 8-week trial in Toms River, the jury ultimately acquitted the company. The Haunted Castle itself was never rebuilt. The site became a botanical garden instead, and the fire is still credited with prompting sweeping changes to national fire codes governing temporary structures and haunted attractions at amusement parks across the country. The victims were mostly local New Jersey and New York teenagers who had come to the park together or met each other there that evening. Investigators later determined the fire had started when a young visitor, trying to see through a corridor darkened by a malfunctioning strobe light, flicked a cigarette lighter and accidentally ignited foam rubber padding lining the walls. That padding, combined with wood partitions, plywood construction, and paper and fabric decorations throughout the attraction, meant the fire spread through the narrow maze of corridors far faster than anyone inside had time to process. Firefighters had the blaze under control within about an hour, but by the time they searched the wreckage, they found 8 bodies burned beyond immediate recognition. The specific loophole that let the structure skip standard fire code requirements, its classification as temporary, despite operating continuously for years, became one of the case's most cited failures once investigators and lawmakers started asking how something this deadly had been allowed to exist in the first place. Number 7. Mine Scrambler. Playland in Rye, New York, is one of the oldest amusement parks in the country, and for years, its Mine Scrambler ride quietly built one of the worst safety records on this entire list. The Scrambler-style ride, which spins riders through overlapping circular arms at high speed, claimed 2 lives during its time at the park, both under disturbingly similar circumstances involving employees not following the park's own safety procedures. The second death, and the one that finally ended the ride's run, involved Gabriella Guerin, a longtime Playland employee who had grown up visiting the park before working there. Guerin was helping riders with their restraints when another staff member started the ride without confirming she was clear of the mechanism, and she was thrown from it. What made the accident especially hard to defend afterward was that Playland had already tightened its safety procedures 3 years earlier, following an almost identical death. Those revised guidelines existed specifically to prevent exactly what happened to Guerin, and somehow they weren't followed a second time. The Scrambler was shut down for good shortly after. Playland occupies an unusual place in American amusement park history, since it's one of the few municipally owned parks left in the country, run by Westchester County rather than a private corporation, which meant Guerin's death became a local political issue as much as a safety one. County officials faced immediate questions about staff training standards and whether the same written safety procedures that failed to prevent one death had been meaningfully reinforced after the fact or simply filed away as paperwork nobody actually followed day to day. It's a pattern that recurs throughout this list in different forms. A park that had already been warned in writing about precisely the failure that ended up killing someone a second time. Number 6. Perilous Plunge. Knott's Berry Farm in Buena Park, California, opened Perilous Plunge in the year 2000, marketing it as one of the tallest and steepest water flume rides in the world, sending riders down a near vertical drop into a splash pool below. It took less than a year for the ride's reputation to turn. In 2001, a woman somehow slipped out of her restraints during the ride and fell to her death. An accident that immediately raised hard questions about the flume's safety systems. Perilous Plunge didn't close right away. Instead, it limped along for another 11 years, plagued by a rotating cast of technical issues, as the park tried repeatedly to patch its safety systems without ever fully resolving the underlying design concerns. To the park's credit, nobody else died on the ride during that stretch, but the damage to its reputation and to public confidence in the attraction never really recovered, and Knott's Berry Farm finally shut it down and dismantled it in 2012, more than a decade after the accident that first put it on borrowed time. At the time it opened, Perilous Plunge was marketed almost entirely around its scale, billed as combining the tallest drop and steepest angle of any flume-style ride operating anywhere in the world. That kind of engineering ambition tends to push a ride further past conventional safety margins than a more conservative design would, since every additional foot of height and every additional degree of steepness multiplies the forces involved in keeping riders securely restrained. The specific mechanism of the 2001 death, a rider somehow slipping free of restraints during the drop itself, pointed directly at that tension between spectacle and restraint design, the same fundamental issue that would later resurface in a considerably more famous and more scrutinized form at Orlando's Icon Park 2 decades afterward. Number 5. The Cannonball Loop. Action Park in Vernon, New Jersey earned its own permanent place in American amusement park infamy across nearly 2 decades of operation, and its most notorious single attraction was the Cannonball Loop, a fully enclosed water slide that sent riders through one complete vertical loop using nothing but gravity and momentum. Before it opened to the public, park employees were reportedly paid roughly $100 each to test ride it, a bounty that says everything about how confident management actually was in the engineering. Test riders came out bloody and bruised on a regular basis, and there are accounts of riders losing teeth that ended up embedded in the slide's padding. The core design flaw turned out to be almost embarrassingly simple. Riders needed enough speed and momentum to carry them fully around the loop, and plenty of guests simply didn't generate enough of either, leaving them stuck upside down inside a fully enclosed tube with no way to see out or call for help. The park eventually had to install an emergency access hatch just to physically extract stranded riders. New Jersey regulators shut the ride down multiple times over the years, and Action Park's owner, characteristically, reopened it anyway more than once, until the state's Advisory Board on Carnival Amusement Ride Safety, a body largely created in direct response to problems at Action Park, finally banned it outright for good. Action Park's guiding philosophy that guests should control their own speed and level of risk rather than have it dictated to them by an engineer's predetermined safety margin made the Cannonball Loop something close to an inevitability rather than an outlier. The park's founder, Gene Mulvihill, marketed the loop heavily in commercials as one of the property's signature attractions, leaning into exactly the kind of danger that would have quietly disqualified the concept at almost any other American amusement park of the era. What eventually forced the state's hand wasn't a single catastrophic death, unlike most of the other entries on this list, but the sheer accumulated volume of documented injuries piling up ride cycle after ride cycle, until regulators concluded no amount of operational tweaking could make the underlying concept safe. Number 4. The Extreme. Not every dangerous ride on this list belongs to a permanent amusement park. Traveling carnival rides operate under their own patchwork of state regulations, and the Extreme, better known by its manufacturer name, the Super Sizzler, exposed exactly how thin that oversight could be. On October 12, 2019, 10-year-old Haley McMullen was thrown from the ride during the Deerfield Township Harvest Festival in South Jersey. She wasn't wearing a seatbelt, which New Jersey didn't require on the ride at the time, even though several other states already did following earlier Sizzler-related deaths elsewhere in the country. New Jersey's Department of Community Affairs shut down every Sizzler-related ride operating in the state within days. And the specific extreme unit involved in McMullen's death was permanently dismantled by its operator, Skelly's Amusements, a company that had run the ride without a major incident for 27 years before that day. The broader Sizzler and Scrambler-style ride family has been linked to at least 4 other deaths nationwide since the year 2000, a pattern that finally pushed several states, New Jersey included, to require seatbelts on rides that previously relied on a single lap bar alone. The regulatory patchwork exposed by McMullen's death is genuinely striking once you lay it out. Massachusetts had already required seatbelts on Sizzler-style rides since 2004, after a man was fatally ejected from one at a church fair and reported no serious incidents since making that change mandatory. Texas had a Sizzler-linked death of its own in 2016, when 16-year-old Samantha Aguilar died at a church festival in El Paso despite the ride having both a lap bar and a seatbelt installed. New Jersey, by contrast, had no statewide seatbelt requirement at all until Haley McMullen's death forced the issue, meaning the exact same make and model of ride could be legally, safely operated in one state while remaining legally, but far less safely, operated just across a nearby border. Number 3. The Fireball. The Fireball at the 2017 Ohio State Fair remains one of the most cited amusement ride disasters of the last decade, and for good reason. On July 26, 2017, the swinging and spinning ride, manufactured by the Dutch company KMG and known in some markets under the name Afterburner, catastrophically failed mid-operation. A gondola holding 4 riders detached from its support arm and was flung into the air, throwing 18-year-old Tyler Jarrell roughly 50 feet before he hit the ground. Jarrell, who had enlisted in the Marine Corps just a week earlier, died of blunt force trauma. 7 other riders were injured. KMG's own investigation traced the failure to excessive internal corrosion inside the gondola's support beam, which had quietly reduced the metal's wall thickness over 18 years of operation, until it simply couldn't hold anymore. Ohio's governor at the time, John Kasich, ordered every ride at the state fair shut down for inspection the same night. KMG went further, ordering every similar ride pulled from operation worldwide, and fairs across Indiana, Illinois, and elsewhere immediately suspended their own Fireball units rather than wait for a definitive answer. The tragedy directly led to Ohio's Tyler's Law, which tightened inspection and maintenance requirements for traveling amusement rides statewide. A bystander photograph turned this case into something more than a straightforward mechanical failure story. A fairgoer named Brian Berry had taken a picture earlier that day showing what appeared to be a visible crack running along the exact arm of the ride that later broke apart, and he turned the photo over to state investigators. An attorney representing one of the injured riders later argued the image should have raised alarms well before the ride ever opened that evening, and questioned why it wasn't included in the official state investigation report. Ohio's own inspection records showed the Fireball had passed roughly 36 individual safety checkpoints that same year, covering everything from potential cracks to brake function to proper assembly. A detail that did little to reassure riders once it became public that inspectors were relying almost entirely on manufacturer guidelines that hadn't flagged the specific corrosion risk that ended up killing Tyler Jarrell. Number 2. Verrückt. Verrückt, German for insane, opened at Schlitterbahn Water Park in Kansas City, Kansas, in 2014. Immediately claiming the title of the world's tallest water slide at 168 feet, roughly 17 stories. with rafts reaching speeds close to 70 miles an hour on the way down. On August 7, 2016, 10-year-old Caleb Schwab, son of Kansas state lawmaker Scott Schwab, rode the slide with two adult women during a special event for legislators. The raft went airborne partway down the slide and struck an overhead metal pole and support netting. Caleb was killed instantly. Both women in the raft with him suffered serious facial and jaw fractures. The fallout was massive. A Kansas grand jury eventually indicted the park's co-owner, the ride's designer, its former operations director, and the construction company that built it, on charges ranging from second-degree murder to involuntary manslaughter, alleging the ride had been rushed into service despite known safety concerns. Those charges were ultimately dismissed in 2019 after a judge ruled the grand jury proceedings had been improperly influenced by dramatized television footage. Criminally, nobody was ever convicted. Physically, the outcome was more decisive. Verrückt was demolished in 2018, and the Schwab family separately settled a wrongful death lawsuit against Schlitterbahn for roughly $20 million. Caleb's father later helped push through new Kansas legislation, ending the practice of letting amusement parks self-inspect their own rides. The backstory behind Verrückt's construction turned out to be almost as damning as the accident itself once it came out in court filings and news reporting. The slide had reportedly been designed and built in only about 4 months, rushed into service specifically so it could be featured on a Travel Channel program called Extreme Water Parks, a timeline that left remarkably little room for the kind of extensive safety modeling a 168-foot, 70-mile-per-hour water ride would normally require. The judge who eventually dismissed the criminal charges specifically flagged concerns that an expert witness before the grand jury had repeatedly cited industry engineering standards that weren't actually legally required under Kansas law at the time Verrückt was built, and that the same witness improperly referenced an unrelated death at a different Schlitterbahn location in Texas. None of that changed the underlying physics that killed Caleb Schwab, but it complicated exactly who, if anyone, could be held criminally responsible for it. Number 1. Orlando Freefall. Which brings us to the most recent, and in some ways the most avoidable, entry on this entire list. The Orlando Freefall opened at Icon Park in December 2021, a 430-foot drop tower billed as the tallest freestanding structure of its kind on Earth, dropping riders at speeds around 75 miles an hour. On March 24, 2022, 14-year-old Tyre Sampson, visiting from Missouri on a school trip, slipped out of his seat and fell to his death as the ride began its descent. The explanation that emerged afterward was almost unbearably specific. Sampson stood 6'5" and weighed roughly 330 pounds, well above the ride's published weight limit. Rather than turning him away, operators had reportedly manually adjusted the proximity sensor on his specific seat, nearly doubling the size of the restraint opening it would accept as properly closed, allowing the safety light to turn green even though Sampson was never actually secured. Bystander video captured someone shouting to check his seatbelt seconds before the ride dropped. The state of Florida declared the ride an immediate danger to public safety within days. Its operator, Orlando Slingshot, agreed to dismantle it entirely, with demolition finishing around the 1-year anniversary of Sampson's death. In May 2023, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed the Tyre-Sampson Act into law, mandating stricter design, inspection, and training requirements for permanent amusement rides statewide. In December 2024, a Florida jury awarded Sampson's family a $310 million civil verdict against the ride's Austrian manufacturer. His mother, Nekia Dodd, watched crews take the tower apart in person, later saying she hoped no other family would ever have to go through what hers did. The specific numbers behind Sampson's death are worth sitting with, because they explain exactly how a routine seat adjustment became a fatal one. State investigators found the ride's harness sensor had been manually loosened to accept a restraint opening of nearly 7 inches, more than double the roughly 3-inch gap the ride was designed to allow. Samson, at 6'5" and roughly 330 pounds, was about 100 pounds over the ride's published weight limit, a detail that should have kept him off the ride entirely, rather than triggering an improvised workaround at the loading platform. Video captured in the moments before the drop shows an attendant shouting to confirm a rider's seatbelt was checked, followed seconds later by Samson visibly sliding from his seat as the tower began its descent. Every safeguard that should have caught the mismatch between Samson's size and the ride's actual limits had, in one way or another, already been bypassed before the ride even started moving. Why these rides kept passing inspection? Anyway, look across all 10 of these cases, and a pattern shows up again and again. Nearly every single one of these rides had passed a recent official safety inspection before it killed someone. Wild Wonder cleared its inspection a month before the Bailey family died on it. The Fireball had passed roughly 3 dozen individual inspection points weeks before its support beam finally gave out. The Extreme had operated for 27 years without a major incident before Haley McMullen's death. A passing inspection in nearly every one of these stories turned out to be a snapshot of a single moment, rather than any real guarantee about what would happen the next time the ride started up. Part of the deeper problem is structural, and it's one that safety advocates have been raising in Washington for decades without much success. Federal oversight of fixed-site amusement park rides is minimal to non-existent, leaving nearly all meaningful regulation to individual states, which means a ride's safety requirements can change entirely depending on which side of a state line it happens to be sitting on. Traveling carnival rides, like the Extreme, fall under an even thinner layer of oversight, inspected wherever they happen to be set up that week, rather than by any single consistent authority tracking their full operating history. Members of Congress have tried repeatedly to close that gap. Legislation with names like the National Amusement Park Ride Safety Act has been introduced in Washington multiple times over the past 2 decades, each attempt aiming to bring fixed-site rides under the same kind of federal safety jurisdiction that already covers everything from mobile carnival rides to children's toys. None of those bills has ever become law, largely due to industry pushback and disagreement over whether state-level oversight is already sufficient. The result is a patchwork system where the exact same make and model of ride can face dramatically different inspection standards depending on which state happens to be hosting it that season. The common thread. There's a specific detail worth sitting with across several of these stories: manual override. The Cannonball Loop's owner personally reopened a ride the state had already shut down. The Orlando Free Fall's restraint sensor was manually adjusted to accept a rider it was designed to reject. Playland's Mind Scrambler killed a second person after staff failed to follow safety procedures the park had already written specifically to prevent it. Automated safety systems, restraint sensors, anti-rollback devices, emergency shutoffs only work as well as the humans who are supposed to respect them when they say no. Every ride on this list had a moment where someone could have stopped and didn't, whether that person was an operator, an engineer, or an owner more focused on keeping the line moving than on the specific warning sitting right in front of them. That pattern cuts across every era on this list, not just the more recent ones. Whether it's a single overlooked bolt at Krug Park in 1930 or a manually widened restraint sensor at Icon Park in 2022, the technology involved changed enormously across 9 decades, but the underlying failure mode barely changed at all. Somebody, somewhere along the chain of decisions between a ride's design and a guest actually boarding it, decided a specific warning sign didn't apply to them that day. Sometimes that decision came from a park owner chasing profit margins. Sometimes it came from an operator trying to avoid an awkward conversation with a paying customer about a weight limit. The rides themselves were never really the point. The decisions made around them were. None of this is meant to suggest modern amusement parks are secretly dangerous places waiting to fail. The overwhelming majority of rides at major parks operate for decades without a single serious incident, and the industry as a whole has gotten measurably safer since stricter inspection requirements followed nearly every disaster on this list. But each of these 10 attractions represents a moment where that broader safety record broke down completely, for reasons that were almost always preventable in hindsight. And the fact that regulators had to step in and permanently ban each one says something important about how much of amusement park safety still depends on people choosing to do the right thing rather than any system forcing them to. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like it and subscribe for more videos just like this one. And let us know in the comments if you remember visiting any of these parks before the rides on this list were ever taken down.